we can get your reserve funds back in two ways. Either one, confirming for them that the time limit for the withholding is passed and that there's no reason that they should be holding this money. Or we look at your average ticket price in comparison to the amount of money that they're holding, which is what we talked about before. If you got an average ticket price of $100, why do you need to build a reserve of like $250,000?
Right. Yeah. The other thing that we attack on this is they know it has to be reasonable.
Yeah. Visa says that the reserve account has to be reasonable in comparison to the amount of risk perceived.
Right. And so we attack it and we're saying this is unreasonable. And then we also know the business practice of eating this up. So as soon as they see our logo, they're going to stop that. Because if they're doing that, that's where we go ballistic, because a judge doesn't want to see that. That doesn't make sense. You're ACHing the account 8 times a day. Why are you doing that? You could try it once a month or a couple times a month, but they have the ability to, so they just do it.
Well, and that's also the dirty, my opinion, that's the dirty little secret behind these arbitration clauses, because the arbitrations are confidential.
Right.
So, what they're doing, when you really dive down into the processing statements and shine a light on what they're doing, it's just like it's a cockroach.
Right.
But then they don't want that getting out.
Welcome to the Payments Experts Podcast, a podcast of Global Legal Law Firm. We hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Payments Experts Podcast, a podcast of Global Legal Law Firm. Today we have in studio joining us Senior Associate Attorney Bryce Vandemore, as well as Managing Partner of Global Legal Law Firm, James Huber. The topic today, gentlemen, is reserve funds, Stripe, Shopify. Jump right in.
Well, I walked by Bryce's office the other day. I mean, he was all riled up about Stripe. So I was going, all right, let's go vent a little bit.
Yeah, this is basically a public service announcement for any merchant that deals with Stripe and is actually successful in dealing with Stripe. And evidently they found a way to take advantage of that. And so I felt like it was necessary for us to put the word out, because we've seen this happen with this client. And now I guess we have at least another case with Shopify, who, if you don't know this, Shopify is actually backed by Stripe. It's described as a white label service of Stripe. So while you're signing up with Shopify, you're really signing up with Stripe. And so this is, I don't think many people know about this, and so it's important that we get the word out.
Yeah, well, let's start. Let's explain some of like the base terms that we're going to be using. Reserve fund, chargeback, anything else. Can you give us just the high level dictionary of these terms and what they are, and then as we use them going about, people can rewind back and listen to them.
Absolutely. So when you sign up with an ISO or a bank, they will look at your business model and look at the good or service that you're selling, and they will assign you a merchant code, also known as a MID, which is like a subset of whatever it is you're offering, and they will determine whether or not you are quote unquote high risk. And if you are high risk, or they deem you to be high risk, they will institute a reserve account, which is basically they'll take a portion of your processing, your revenue, and they'll move it over into a side account, and it'll just sit there in case you get like chargebacks or fines or penalties, or you end up being busted for like widespread fraud, and then they would go to your main account, your merchant account, and they would get the money to pay the chargeback or pay the fine or whatever. If you don't have that money in your merchant account, they would then turn to the reserve account for those funds, because they don't want to have to pay them on your behalf. And because the card brands, the MasterCard, Visa, mandate that somebody has to pay that back. And so they're just going to take it from the bank, and it's going to roll downhill, and the bank's going to take it from the ISO, and then the ISO is going to have to go after the merchant for it. But one common misconception is that while the money's going to the reserve account, they're not going to touch that reserve account until you're terminated. They're going to continue to draw from your merchant account. So that money just sits there, and very often there isn't even a cap on it, and there isn't even a negotiated percentage they're going to take. They just determine it themselves, and they do it. Do you have the ability to negotiate? Sure you do, but most merchants don't do that, or know that they can do that. They will take what's given to them, They just want to go on processing. And this reserve fund and this high risk designation is where Stripe's, I guess, new scheme is coming from.
Well, a lot of the reasons that a lot of merchants don't negotiate is they're so happy to get processing.
Exactly.
So, having some of the money go into a reserve account, they're going, okay, whatever, I'll get that money back eventually, you would hope. But we see this with not only Stripe, but other processors. They hold on to these. And as you said, it's not just a set amount. They're not, sometimes they say, yeah, you got to put 200 grand in reserve off the get-go. Usually it's a rolling reserve, 10% of your processing revenue. And, I do see situations where they do give some back, and you're not seeing that with Stripe right now, but usually it's a rolling reserve, but you have merchants who are ramping up. That 10% of your volume, it gets huge. And sure, they're releasing some of the other money, but they're collecting way more than they're releasing. And then, a lot of times we'll see them collect, cut it off, and then they'll take that reserve and they'll dig away at it, by things of like, oh, we keep going into your account and there's no money there. It was like, well, yeah, there's no money there because you took it all. And then they'll try and they'll go, oh, ACH reject fee, ACH reject fee. And we're charging you $25 for each ACH reject, but our cost is only $2. So they'll hit that 8 times a day, every day, and just eat up your reserve account. They have all these things, and we'll see them basically take your reserve account. So you're right. When you're getting into a processing relationship, it seems great. You're so happy you're live. You've got to negotiate these terms with the processors and even Stripe, because they will negotiate them. And if you don't try to negotiate them with them, it hurts your ability to sue them. So to sue them for an unconscionable contract, you have to try to negotiate it. And that can get you around the arbitration clause. And it might not get around the arbitration clause, but it can get you to a place where you're actually challenging their business practice, and not just your dispute. You're going, the whole operation is messed up.
Yeah, and in the event that it goes to litigation, you need to show that you at least made an effort to negotiate.
Right, and Stripe, of course, they're going to say no.
Yeah.
But they might negotiate reserve terms.
But you requested.
But you requested, and you go, hey, I just wanted, this one term. I mean, these contracts, these are very draconian contracts. And look, I mean, most contracts are, unless you negotiate them.
Well, you're dealing with a bank, which is as risk averse as it gets, and Stripe is like nuclear about risk aversion. So their merchant processing agreements, which we refer to in the industry as MPAs, yeah, they're so onerous and against the merchant. I mean, it's just like, and back to your comment about the reserve funds, it's just, you need to know you can negotiate. Okay, you can take this percentage of my revenue to build a reserve account. You can build a reserve account to like a set amount and then stop. But like, as Jeremy will attest, on these reserve fund release cases that we get, these merchants come to us with, banks holding hundreds of thousands of dollars in their reserve accounts, and they have an average ticket price, which is like an average sale and therefore an average chargeback of like $100. And it's like, what do you guys think is going to happen? I mean, there's going to be this huge run on $100 chargebacks, and it's going to eat up this $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 that you're now holding for 270 days, or even as much as 540 days. Which is, I know the merchants aren't aware of that, because they're not looking at the downside, and I understand why. They just want to get going, making money. They're not interested in the details, but they need to be, and that's where you need an attorney to look at this stuff. Right,
and the difference is you're going, okay, well, a bank is holding my money. That's what banks do. You know what they're doing? They're going loading it all over. With the reserve account, they're not supposed to. That money is actually supposed to be there. Now, it all goes to one bank account, but the ledger is supposed to say, Bryce's $10 is right here, cell D4, and the truth is, that generally doesn't happen. They actually, yes, do go, either they play with it or they show it on their balance sheet for this, that, or the other thing. And like you said, they don't want any risk of loss. And like I said, they eat it up and they take it for fees. So yeah, for everybody, having a huge amount of money in your account, even if it's not yours, is generally good, unless of course you're an attorney and it's your trust account, which is, just a headache to have sitting there. But
plus they get all the interest on the account. You don't. The merchants.
They're not supposed to charge interest on the reserve account.
But the MPA says like anything on that money is theirs.
Yeah, is theirs, even if whatever slush they do with it. Okay, so what specifically is Stripe doing these days?
Okay, well, we had a client come to us, and he runs a event ticket service, and his model is actually pretty brilliant in that he only accepts payment by Zelle. So he doesn't have to deal with chargebacks at all. And in a ticket environment, you get the ticket, go to the event, and you charge back the entire thing. It's just it's the same old scam. Well, Stripe has evidently, and I haven't really researched how long they've had this, but we've had they had an issue with a new wing of Stripe called Stripe Capital, and so Stripe, he was with Stripe, he was processing, it was great. Stripe even actually sent him emails congratulating him about how well things were going and how profitable he was, and they then had Stripe Capital contact him and say, hey, we noticed that you're doing really well. We can offer a loan at per the merchant. The terms were great. They negotiated that they were going to give him the loan, and they were going to charge him 35% of his revenue to pay the loan back. Fine. Well, then about a couple weeks later, Stripe contacts him and says, hey, we've now determined that you're high risk, which is evidently something they couldn't figure out before. They had Stripe Capital hit them up. And so now we're going to take 35%. We're going to build a reserve of 35%. And it's not negotiable. So now Stripe was taking 65% of his revenue.
And he's locked. He can't cancel Stripe because he's got the Stripe Capital loan. The terms are probably, you have to stay in bed with us.
Exactly. So, and typical Stripe, you never get the same person. No one person is ever assigned to your case. They don't put any names on their emails. It's just like you don't even know who you're talking to, and it's the same conversation, over and over and over again. And so, they're taking 65% of his monthly revenue, and he's complaining to them because his business is now in jeopardy.
Right? How can you survive? His business margin is a 65% profit.
Exactly. He can't even make payroll. So I get involved, and first off, they just straight out ignore me. They won't even talk to me. I'm like, get me to legal. I don't want to deal with the complaints department, and they're just not hearing me at all. They're just being and I think it's intentionally obtuse about it.
Well, of course.
So then they come back and they say to our client, we're going to actually unilaterally impose 100% reserve for the next 90 days. So you're not going to get any revenue from us for the next 90 days. And at the end of that 90 days, they terminate him.
Oh.
So it's just like,
you can't
but
make
we're going to give you 14
up.
days to find out the processor. And we're going to hold all your money. And you're still on the hook with Stripe Capital.
Yeah.
And so he's with us, and we're making a bunch of noise. But at the end of the day, the guy's still, his business is in jeopardy. And it could fold like any month. And I made it clear. It's obvious. The way I first approached this was like, well, obviousobviously Stripe Capital and Stripe are not communicating. They're two separate, subsidiaries or entities, and so maybe it's just a miscommunication. We'll know. Stripe Capital directly refers to the Stripe, services agreement,
right,
within its terms and conditions. So they know what they're in communication. They know what they're doing. Stripe Capital has reached out to him because he's complained so much about the situation. And supposedly they're going to work with him on it, but they're slow as molasses,
right,
and they're very vague about what that's going to be. I seriously doubt they're gonna reduce the amount that he has to pay, because that's just not how banks work. And so now like I said, we have another client coming in, and Shopify is now doing the same thing.
Exact same thing.
So the only way around this is you have to negotiate these agreements, because great, we'll go sue them. And they will slam their contract down on the table and say, every single thing that we did is justified by the agreement.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get around. I mean, some judges, they'll see it and they'll go, okay, yeah, this is a unfair, deceptive business practice of how you guys even have these agreements. Other judges will go, the contracts by their nature are unfair. That's why you negotiate them. And you didn't negotiate it. You just signed it and you're running, whatever. This guy, luckily he's, his business is, I don't want to say a scalper is, totally,
it's like a StubHub.
Exactly. Right. But there's other merchants that will go in, and when they go to sue, they're going, well, what you're doing is, quasi, I don't want to say illegal, but like it's not totally legitimate business. So then they come into court and they're going, well, this is an unfair business practice. And they're going, well, what do you guys do for a living? But it's fine. Everyone's out there making money. And, look, I buy my tickets off of those sites sometimes too. It's fabulous,
Yeah.
Well, you're not standing outside of the venue going,
you can't buy from the venue anymore. I mean, StubHub and Ticketmaster, they just swoop in and take them all in.
No, I just went to the Sphere and people are standing outside being like, extra ticket. And I was like, the extra tickets, use your phone.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Exactly. But in this instance, the guy was approved to sell event tickets.
All right.
And if they were doing their job in the underwriting and the onboarding, they knew his business model, they knew how it worked, and they didn't designate him as high risk. They only designated him high risk after Stripe Capital got their hooks into him.
Well, Bryce, how many times have we seen that? Sorry to cut you off, James.
Yeah,
how many times have we seen that, right? Where they'll underwrite them. They evidently know exactly what the merchant's up to, regardless of what field they're in. And then 1 month later, 6 months later, they change their mind.
Well, Stripe Square's business model is that. They don't check on the way in. They get you up and they'll terminate you 3 months later. But the red flag that you will always is don't keep going is if somebody puts you on 100% reserve, stop processing.
Yeah.
You're not coming off. It's not going to get better from there.
Stop processing and cut off their access to the account.
Cut off their access, get all the money out of there, get a new processor. Even if your system goes down, you're probably better off because you're not getting the money anymore. And I get it. You need to keep your website up and running, but fine. Know that it's not going to get better. Get a contingency plan.
And hopefully you can get a new processor before they figure out what you're up to, and then they just match list you just because they can.
I would say any time you're in a situation, look, if you got a little reserve, okay, and maybe you know the processor and you've spoken to them, great. But if it starts going up, that's where it's going. It's time to process have something else set up and ready to go.
Yeah, because they just do it. They just
do it.
We're
it's
doing
great
this.
for
It's starting
business.
now, and you can't do it.
I'm keeping it, and sue me for it.
Yeah.
And then, okay, we'll sue you for it, and they'll give it back, but you had to pay us a bunch of money, and fine, if it goes to trial, you get your attorney's fees back, but it's not worth it for anybody, especially the way that we litigate it is, go flamethrower, burn everybody to the ground, and
Wouldn't have it anyway.
give me my money back quick. And they do, but it's an expensive couple months.
Well, and it's a vicious cycle too, because we're like, they're not going to deal. They're not willing to deal with us, so we need to sue. And the client's looking at me like, I just had all my revenue cut off.
Right.
I don't have any money.
Well, that's part of the model too. I mean,
guess so.
That's every villain in financial movies. Get all their money. You can't afford to sue me now, and then here comes attorney. Remus coming in, and he doesn't stand a chance.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the idea is, one, they're taking a reserve. When they're taking a reserve, you should be putting one aside too, because you might have to go fight these guys for it.
Yeah, and I guess the lesson here is don't double dip. If somebody's already responsible for your cash flow, do not go in deeper with them on a loan. Do not go deeper with them. It's like this. Just like I referred to it to Stripe to their face. This is just like some perverse loan sharking scheme.
Right.
That
There were other options to get a loan, and I'm sure people will think about that in the future. But that is good advice. Don't go into. I mean, we used to do a bunch of merchant cash advance litigation where people are getting these short-term, high-interest loans for their business tied to their processing, and then it would come due, and then they'd get another loan to pay off that loan. Yeah. It's going, okay,
and
don't stack it up.
And because I've seen this happen before, the terms and conditions of the primary loan say you can't go get another loan to pay this loan off.
Right.
You
Wow.
can't encumber yourself further before we're paid off.
But look, I mean, everyone's allowed to make mistakes in their business, and then, people
how
shouldn't
you
be
learn.
taking advantage of it.
Yeah.
That's the big thing.
Yeah.
And so that's where we come in and go, yeah, okay, we've all made humongous mistakes in our business. One's probably me sitting down here today, but, don't take advantage of it. So,
Yeah, one little side note, because you mentioned Square earlier, and I may have mentioned this in another podcast, but people need to be aware of the fact, because we were not aware until Square's attorneys called me. Square doesn't have a bank of its own. It can't place people on Match. Square uses your bank that you identify
Right.
to them. So if you're getting matched or you're getting money taken, it's not Square taking it. It's
Wow.
your own bank, and
Yeah, but
but your
it's
own
at their
bank's not going to.
direction.
But your own bank is not going to tell you.
right.
They're not going to tell you they did it. They're just going to sit there and wait for you to figure it out on your own.
Yeah. All right. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, just don't double tip. And if it seems too good to be true, in this case, it really is.
And anytime you're dealing with a faceless corporation, because look, there are plenty of good payment processors out there for high risk merchants that don't engage in this.
And James, we can connect them with
Yeah, we
somebody.
refer
Yeah,
merchants all the
absolutely.
time.
Well, when we get these merchants to come in, we're like, I'm so sorry. Here, you can go talk to this person. We've actually worked with them for years, and they're good people.
They'll treat you like an actual client, not a number.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And they have technology and stuff. I mean, our clients, we used to be, we represent sales organizations or the processor. They're all called fintech companies now. So they've got the solutions because they saw what Stripe and Square were doing. Yeah, that was scary for them for a minute. And then they went, these guys are horrible.
Yeah, they are. I mean, and I guess the other thing is, when we're talking, millions of dollars in processing, to spend $1,000 or $2,000 having an attorney look over the terms of your merchant processing agreement.
It boggles my mind.
I mean, we see them all the time, all forms, all terms. We can tell you, this is a bad deal. You don't want to do this.
And if they say no to these terms, then they're probably going to enforce them.
Yeah,
when you go,
absolutely.
if you're a merchant, you're working with one of the processors that we work with a lot. Their terms are pretty rough too. Mm-hmm. But if you call them on it, a lot of times they can change it. It takes some legwork because with the MPAs, there are upstream agreements where you actually have to get the bank to agree. But a lot of the processors will get pre-approval for stuff where they can move it because a lot of time the rules say you can't change the MPA. So. But the good ones will say, hey, we're going to agree to a range of limits, like things like we can't steal reserve funds.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking a major part of the agreement. We're just talking about, okay, I'll agree to letting you take this percentage for this long until you build a reserve amount of this much, and then we stop. And depending on how profitable the bank thinks you're going to be, they're going to work with you. Because they want your business.
I'll add one last thing before we sign off is the only rules that govern the reserve fund. Now, there are banking rules, but they wouldn't apply to how much they're allowed to take, are Visa and MasterCards. I say they're rules because they're just rules that Visa and MasterCard makes up and they enforce. But their rules, the only rules that touch this, say that the merchant reserve has to be, guess what? Reasonable. Mm-hmm. It's entirely reasonable for me to take all of their money for 10 months and put them in a loan. And so, that's one way that we'll be attacking.
Yeah. And explain to me how that's reasonable and total silence. Total silence.
Gentlemen, I'm going to ask one thing of you. We do a lot of reserve fund work. Bryce, you've got your finger on it almost every single day. We do get reserve funds returned to our clients all the time. We don't win every case, of course, but we do, very often successfully get reserve funds returned to our clients. Can we talk quickly about how do we do that, and why should people with reserve fund issues reach out to Global Legal Law Firm?
Because otherwise you're going to end up in some customer service loop with some, 9 to 5 minimum wage person who has no authority, and we're going to get you to legal, and they're going to look at the contract and they're going to be like, oh yeah, we have some exposure here. we've passed the deadline. Either we can get your reserve funds back in two ways. Either one, confirming for them that the time limit for the withholding is passed and that there's no reason that they should be holding this money. Or we look at your average ticket price in comparison to the amount of money that they're holding, which is what we talked about before. If you got an average ticket price of $100, why do you need to build a reserve of like $250,000?
Right. Yeah. The other thing that we attack on this is they know it has to be reasonable.
Yeah. Visa says that the reserve account has to be reasonable in comparison to the amount of risk perceived.
Right. So we attack it and we're saying this is unreasonable. And then we also know the business practice of eating this up. So as soon as they see our logo, they're going to stop that, because if they're doing that, that's where we go ballistic, because a judge doesn't want to see that. That doesn't make sense. You're ACHing the account 8 times a day. Why are you doing that? You could try it once a month or a couple times a month, but they have the ability to, so they just do it.
Well, and that's also the dirty, my opinion, that's the dirty little secret behind these arbitration clauses, because the arbitrations are confidential.
Right.
So, what they're doing, when you really dive down into the processing statements and shine a light on what they're doing, it's just like it's a cockroach.
Right.
But then they don't want that getting out.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Payments Experts Podcast, a podcast of Global Legal Law Firm. Visit us online today at globallegallawfirm.com.